The moment my brother called to tell me the wedding date, I was standing in my kitchen making coffee. My coffee in my coffee maker that I'd bought with my own money 3 years ago when I moved back home to help my parents get back on their feet. That was the phrase they used, get back on their feet. I'd been helping them get back on their feet for 31 months. I know the exact number because I'd been counting. I moved back in the summer I turned 28. My dad had just lost his job at the logistics company he'd been with for 12 years. Restructuring, they called it, which is just a polite word for you're too expensive and we found someone younger. My mom worked part-time at a dental office, 3 days a week, and that wasn't going to cover rent, utilities, and 2 people's worth of groceries. They called me on a Tuesday. By Saturday, I'd given notice on my apartment in Columbus and started packing boxes. I didn't hesitate, that's the thing I keep coming back to. I didn't even take a day to think it over. At the time I was making decent money. Not great, but decent. I was a project coordinator at a mid-size marketing firm. $62,000 a year, which in Columbus meant I could live comfortably, save a little, take a trip once in a while. Nothing extravagant, but mine. The plan, as my parents explained it, was temporary. 6 months, maybe 8. My dad would find something new. My mom would pick up more hours. I'd help cover the mortgage and the bills in the meantime, and once they were stable, I'd go back to my life. I believed them. I want to be clear about that. I believed them completely. So I moved back into my childhood bedroom in Dayton, the one with the slanted ceiling and the window that sticks every winter, and I started paying. Not rent exactly, they never called it rent. It was just helping with the mortgage. $1,200 a month toward a house I didn't own and would never inherit in any meaningful way, since my brother was always understood to be the one who'd take care of things when the time came. That was another phrase my family used a lot, take care of things. It meant my brother, whose name is Garrett, would eventually be in charge of whatever was left. He was the oldest, he was the son. That was just how it worked in our family, and nobody ever said it out loud, which somehow made it worse. Garrett is 3 years older than me. He's always been the one my parents talked about with a specific kind of pride. The pride you reserve for something you built yourself, something that reflects well on you. He had some struggles in his 20s, a few false starts, but by the time I moved back home he'd settled into a job in T and was living 40 minutes away with his girlfriend, whose name is Vanessa. He came to dinner maybe twice a month. My parents lit up every time he walked in. I'm not saying they didn't love me. I think they did in their way. But there's a difference between being loved and being seen, and I spent most of those 31 months feeling like furniture, useful, present, occasionally rearranged, never quite looked at directly. The first year I paid the mortgage and half the utilities and bought most of the groceries. I told myself it was temporary. My dad was interviewing. He'd land something soon. He landed something in month 9, a warehouse supervisor position, lower pay than before but steady. I exhaled. I thought, okay, this is it. Things will shift now. They didn't shift. The mortgage payment stayed the same. The grocery run stayed the same. The utilities stayed the same. My mom started talking about getting the bathroom redone and maybe replacing the water heater before it goes. And somehow I was the one those conversations were directed at. Not in a demanding way, just in the way you talk to someone who handles things. I was the one who handled things. In month 14, I paid to have the water heater replaced, $1,100. I have the receipt. I have all the receipts. Actually, that habit started around month 8, when I realized I needed to keep track of what was mine versus what was theirs, though at the time I couldn't have told you exactly why. I bought the living room couch when the old one finally gave out. I bought a new refrigerator when the seal on the old one cracked, and it started running constantly. I bought the smart TV my dad watches football on. I bought the router, the microwave, the set of pots and pans my mom uses every day. I bought the dining room table we all ate at together on the Thanksgivings and Christmases when Garrett and Vanessa drove over and everyone acted like a normal family. I want to say I resented all of it from the beginning, but that's not honest. For a long time I didn't. I felt needed. I felt like I was doing something real and good for people who needed me. There's a particular kind of person who mistakes being needed for being valued, and for a long time I was that person. The shift happened slowly. And then, the way these things always go, all at once. About 8 months before the wedding, my dad sat me down at the kitchen table, the table I bought, and told me they were struggling a little with some unexpected expenses, and would I be able to increase my contribution for a while. He said it so casually, like he was asking me to grab something from the top shelf. Just a small thing. No big deal, I said yes, of course I did. I increased my monthly contribution by $300. 2 months later, Garrett called to tell me he and Vanessa were engaged. I was happy for him, genuinely. I like Vanessa. She's warm and funny, and she actually talks to me like I'm a person, which I appreciated more than she knew. But then the conversations started, the planning conversations, the budget conversations, the what do we do about the venue conversations. And I started to notice something. My parents were excited in a way I hadn't seen in years. My mom was on the phone with Garrett almost every evening. My dad was suddenly energized, talking about wanting to do this right for their son. They pulled out their savings. Savings I had not known existed, by the way, savings that apparently had been accumulating quietly while I was covering the mortgage, and started talking numbers. The venue they were looking at cost $4,000 to rent for a Saturday. The catering was another $8,000. My parents were prepared to put in $20,000 toward this wedding. I did the math, standing in the hallway outside my bedroom. $20,000. While I had been paying $1,200 a month for nearly 3 years. While I had replaced the water heater and the refrigerator and the couch and the TV and the table, we were all going to sit around at Garrett's rehearsal dinner. I didn't say anything that night. I went to my room and I sat on the edge of my bed that I'd bought to replace the one that had gotten moldy in the basement before I moved back, and I stared at the wall for a long time. Over the next few weeks, I paid attention in a way I hadn't let myself before. I noticed that my parents never asked whether I could afford my contribution. They never asked how I was doing financially, whether I had savings, whether I was okay. They asked Garrett those questions. They worried about whether Garrett was stressed about the wedding costs. They offered to help Garrett and Vanessa put down a deposit on an apartment closer to the venue so they wouldn't have to drive so far on the wedding day. They offered to cover an apartment deposit for my brother while I was sleeping 15 feet down the hall, having paid their mortgage for 31 months. I called my best friend Priya, who has known me since college and who has watched this whole situation unfold from a careful, loving distance. I told her everything, the $20,000, the deposit offer, the savings I hadn't known about. She was quiet for a moment and then she said, "So what are you going to do?" I didn't have an answer yet. What I did was start making a list. I have a specific kind of brain, I always have. I like things written down, itemized, clear. So I went back through my bank statements, all 31 months of them, and I wrote down every single thing I had paid for in that house. Mortgage contributions, utilities, groceries, appliances, furniture, repairs, the water heater, the refrigerator, the Wi-Fi router that everyone in the house used, the new toilet seat in the upstairs bathroom, the weather stripping on the front door that was letting in a draft. When I finished the list, I sat with it for a while. Then I started making a second list. Everything in that house that I had purchased, that I had receipts for, that was legally and factually mine. It was a long list. I didn't tell anyone what I was doing. I just started quietly, methodically making plans. I called a moving company. I looked at apartments. I found a 2-bedroom in a neighborhood I liked, 30 minutes away. First month, last month, and security deposit, all of which I could cover because I had been earning a salary this whole time and spending so much of it on my family that I'd had less than I should have saved. But I had saved something. I had always been careful. The moving company had availability on a Saturday in March. The Saturday that happened to be, by complete coincidence. Or maybe not coincidence, maybe some quiet part of me had planned it this way, 4 days before Garrett and Vanessa's wedding. I booked it. I didn't tell my parents I was leaving. I didn't tell Garrett. I didn't tell Vanessa, even though I liked her. I knew that if I said anything, there would be conversations, and the conversations would turn into guilt, and the guilt would turn into me unpacking my boxes and putting the couch back and staying. I'd stayed long enough. The week before the move, I was careful. I acted normal at dinner. I responded to my mom's texts about the wedding seating chart. I confirmed that yes, I had my dress, and yes, I would be at the rehearsal dinner on Friday. I was not going to be at the rehearsal dinner on Friday. The Saturday morning of the move, my parents left early to go to the wedding venue for a final walkthrough with the coordinator. They'd be gone until at least 2 in the afternoon. The movers arrived at 9. I want to tell you it felt dramatic, watching them carry things out. It didn't. It felt quiet and very, very right. The couch, the TV, the refrigerator, that one took 2 guys and some maneuvering through the kitchen doorway. The dining room table, the pots and pans, the router, the microwave, my bedroom furniture. The lamps I'd bought for the living room because my mom said the old ones were depressing. The coffee table, the bookshelves. A small corner cabinet I'd refinished myself one weekend because I needed something to do with my hands. I left the things that were theirs. The old kitchen chairs that had been there since I was a kid. The dishes my mom had collected over 20 years, the ones with the blue pattern around the rim. The beds in their bedroom and the spare room. The bathroom things. I wasn't taking anything that wasn't mine. I had the receipts to prove every item I did take. Before I left, I wrote a note. I keep going back and forth about whether that was the right call, but in the end I left it on the kitchen counter, next to the coffee maker, which was mine, so the coffee maker left with me, but the counter it had always sat on stayed. The note said, "I've moved out. I took only what I purchased. I have documentation for all of it. I won't be at the wedding. I hope you have a beautiful day. I love you, but I can't keep doing this. I need to build my own life." I read it back 3 times. Then I folded it, left it there, and walked out. My new apartment was on the 3rd floor of a building with a small balcony that faces west. The movers had everything in by 4 o'clock. I tipped them well because they'd been fast and professional and hadn't asked any questions, which I appreciated. I sat on my couch in my apartment, and I looked at the late afternoon light coming through the sliding door, and I felt something I hadn't felt in 31 months. Still. Not happy exactly, not sad, just still. Like something that had been braced for impact had finally been allowed to rest. My phone started ringing at 6:47 p.m. It was my mom. I let it go to voicemail. It rang again at 6:51. My dad, then Garrett, then my mom again. 3 more times in rapid succession, like they were passing the phone around the room. I turned the ringer off and went to unpack my kitchen. The voicemails came in fast. I didn't listen to them that night. I could see the notifications stacking up, the little red numbers, but I left them alone. I made myself dinner. Pasta, simple, something I'd made 100 times. And I ate it at my own table, in my own place, and I did not cry. I thought I might. I'd expected to, but I didn't. The next morning, I listened to the voicemails. The first one, from my mom, was confused more than angry. Her voice had that specific quality it gets when she doesn't understand what's happening. Higher than usual, a little breathless. She said the house looked like a completely different place, and she didn't understand, she just didn't understand. Where had everything gone? Where was I? Why hadn't I answered? My dad's was shorter. He said they needed to talk. His voice was very controlled, which meant he was furious. Garrett's was the one I'd been dreading. He didn't yell. He spoke very carefully and quietly, which with my brother is actually worse than yelling. He said I had picked the worst possible time to do whatever I was doing. He said my mom was upset. He said the wedding was 4 days away and I had apparently decided to make it about myself. About myself. I sat with that for a while. I had paid this family's mortgage for nearly 3 years. I had replaced their appliances, their furniture, their router, their water heater. I had canceled plans, skipped opportunities, declined a job offer in Denver that I still think about sometimes, because I'd felt like I couldn't leave. I had increased my monthly contribution when asked, without a single question in return about whether I could afford it, because it had never occurred to anyone to ask, and moving out, quietly, legally, taking only what was mine, 4 days before a wedding that had been funded with money I hadn't known existed while I was covering basic living expenses. That was me making it about myself. I didn't respond that day. I went to a coffee shop near my new apartment, ordered a latte, sat by the window, and just existed for a while without anyone needing anything from me. The next few days were a mixture of silence and noise. My parents called, Garrett called, an aunt I'm not particularly close to called, which told me the story was spreading through the family. I answered none of it. I texted Priya, who responded with a series of messages that essentially amounted to, "You did the right thing, you are not crazy, stop second-guessing yourself." I did second-guess myself. I want to be honest about that. There were moments, usually late at night in the new apartment, while it still smelled like cardboard and unfamiliar air, when I wondered if I'd been too extreme, if I should have said something first, if there had been a version of this where I sat down with my parents and explained, calmly, that something needed to change. But I'd replayed those hypothetical conversations enough times to know how they would have gone. My mom would have cried. My dad would have gotten defensive. Garrett would have said I was being dramatic. And I would have stayed. I would have stayed because I would have felt guilty, and because feeling guilty was the only language my family and I had ever really spoken to each other in. So I didn't give them the chance to use it. The wedding happened without me. I know this because Vanessa texted me the following Tuesday, just the two of us privately. She said the day was beautiful. She understood, even if she didn't know the whole story. She said she hoped I was okay. I told her I was. I told her congratulations, and I meant it. I did not reach out to my parents. About 2 weeks after the wedding, my dad texted me, not called, texted, which surprised me. The message said, "I've been thinking, maybe we leaned on you too much." I don't know if sorry covers it, but I am. I read it 6 or 7 times. I didn't respond right away. I made myself wait a day, not out of cruelty, but because I needed to be sure I was responding from a clear head and not from the part of me that still, after everything, just wanted to be told I was loved. When I did respond, I kept it short. I said I appreciated him saying that. I said I needed more time. I said I wasn't ready to talk yet, but maybe eventually. He didn't push, that was new. My mom took longer. She called about a month later, and this time I picked up. The conversation was hard, she cried. I stayed calm, which I think surprised both of us. I told her what I'd told my dad, that I'd needed to go, that it wasn't about the wedding specifically, that it had been building for a long time. She said she hadn't realized. I told her I believed her, which I did, and that not realizing is also a choice, which she didn't love hearing but didn't argue with either. I'm not going to tell you that everything is resolved now, because it isn't. I still haven't been back to that house. I still feel a particular tightening in my chest when I see Garrett's name on my phone. I still have nights where I lie awake and cycle through every moment, and wonder if I was fair, if I was kind, if I could have done it differently. But then I wake up in the morning and I make coffee in my own kitchen, in my own coffee maker, in my own apartment that I chose and signed a lease for, and stocked entirely on my terms. And I think about how I took what was mine, not what I was owed, because I will never see that, but what was literally, documentably, receipt probably mine, and I walked out of a situation that had been slowly, quietly convincing me that my needs were the last ones on the list. I am 31 years old. I have a balcony that faces west. I have a 2-bedroom apartment where the second bedroom is currently empty, and I'm not in a hurry to fill it. I don't know exactly what my relationship with my family looks like from here. I know that some things are going to have to be said when I'm ready to say them. I know there are versions of this story where we find our way back to something real, and versions where we don't. What I know right now, sitting here in my own space, is this. I spent 31 months making myself smaller, so that everyone around me could take up more room. And one Saturday morning in March I stopped. That's not revenge, I want to be clear about that. It's not revenge, and it never was. Revenge would have meant I wanted them to suffer. I don't. I just wanted, finally, at 31 years old, to be the one who decided what happened to my own life. I'm still figuring out what that looks like. But it's mine to figure out. For the first time in a long time, it's completely mine.